Can you believe it, guys?
So I flopped
Christmas.
around for
Just a
like
week away.
half
Christmas
of
is in a
December
week.
trying to think of
Woohoo!
something to write
I am
about
so
that would
happy to
be
have this
even vaguely
information.
Christmassy, from Parasite to Scrooge to even that nightmare of a movie, Jack Frost, and just nothing was working out. When I write these videos, I don't just choose something, an idea usually pops into my head and then I go for it. I have several ideas in my backlog, but just nothing Christmas related. So I'm sitting there, running out of time, watching my daily Christmas movie that my mom likes to do, and we turn on something that I decidedly hated when it came out and hadn't really seen since it did. But this time around, with the hindsight of not being a child, it kind of surprised me by being exactly what I remembered it being, but yet being something completely different. So, a happy holiday to all. Hopefully, I'll finally make something short this time so it can be out by Christmas. And I hope you're all warm and cozy this winter, because I know I'm not. So when I say Robert Zemeckis, what's the first thing you think of? Most people would probably all think of either Forrest Gump or Back to the Future. Zemeckis is one of the most influential filmmakers of the 80s and 90s and was constantly pushing the boundaries of film technology and control over the final project, making some of the most beloved and well-known movies out there, especially for their time, even if all of them weren't roaring successes. But he had an insanely good run from the 80s all the way to the start of the 2000s with Castaway, while already showing just how weird and out there he could get with more technology and control. It was a pretty big success in the box offices, and even pulled 2 Oscar nominations. But then things got interesting.
Hey, you!
Finally awake.
As a new technological development hit the movie industry: motion capture. The tech to kill animators. It could track all the complex movements of humans and render them into animation without having to do any of the expensive, long tasks of, well, animating. It was a crazy new way to use live actors' appearances in 3D spaces while using all the freedoms of the new 3D animation. Zemeckis ended up following the natural path of wanting to push technology and control over his movies, and made one of the few mocap movies out there.
Your attention, please. Are there any Polar Express passengers in need of refreshment? I thought so.
And it was interesting. The Polar Express, another Christmas movie, but not the one I'm talking about today, can best be described as a ride movie. Like, no joke, so many of the scenes from this movie feel like they wouldn't be out of place at all on a Disney or Universal ride, having almost no narrative tension for anything, or really even any narrative at all. Things bounce around with a flowing, unnecessarily large set piece for literally nothing. It's mostly just Zemeckis doing whatever he wanted with almost no substance and creepy characters that I hated with everything in me growing up, and literally everyone is voiced by Tom Hanks. But despite my personal qualms with the movie, it still ended up performing pretty well and becoming something of a Christmas classic among people my age. After the Polar Express, he went out for another run. Having tried a kid's story, he was now going to try and use the technology to make a gritty fantasy movie for all the adults and edgelord teens with Beowulf. And this time around, it went pretty poorly. I haven't seen it, but having seen scenes from it, while it at least has some more plot having a book as source material, it still gets far too obsessed with this control and flashiness and uncanny motion capture, and well, according to most everyone, it just wasn't very good. In fact, Zemeckis hasn't really made a universally well-liked movie since pretty much Castaway, even after he started moving more-ish away from mocap. So it wasn't really any surprise that I didn't like A Christmas Carol at all growing up. It was creepy, it was weird, it didn't feel anything like the Mickey or Muppet Christmas Carol, which I loved. It had long set pieces, just like the Polar Express, that I just hated and honestly was even creepier. But on my most recent viewing, something changed about the way I viewed it.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
So this movie opens almost exactly like the book, and literally with the book, starting with the first words at the top of the page. Marley's dead face, and Scrooge signing the paper, something that most adaptations of the story to screen don't seem to do. In fact, typically the main focus of most adaptations that are especially popular is Cratchit and Tiny Tim, which, by the way, we grew up calling these little mushrooms and Mario Tiny Tim mushrooms, and I have no idea why. And usually the emotional core lies in the fact that Tiny Tim will die if Scrooge doesn't change, and gosh dang it, Kermit the Frog is Bob Cratchit, so why not focus on him? But this movie takes its time getting you into everything and doesn't really give Cratchit much screen time in general, electing to follow a more book-accurate story, using direct quotes from the narration in the book, doing a great opening to paint Scrooge in the same dramatic way that the narration of the book does, without going out of its way in accuracy to actually have a narrator. And remember that. It'll be important later. We get the title card and a nice sweeping shot over the town that will serve most of our movie. Large, dirty, Christmassy, sweeping around, allowing it to show the differences between the rich and the poor, all in one shot. Again, total control of the digital space and its camera. And here at the beginning, it works really well, taking a pretty short story that is pretty straightforward in its text to the language of film perfectly, and stretching the story a bit to fit its feature-length runtime. The score and the sound design getting you into that creepy, almost horror feeling the story has, that again, very few versions lean all the way into. We time jump a bit, and Scrooge is in a typical place in his little shop, working with Bob, who looks very creepy. Heck, all these characters look pretty creepy, but we'll get to that later. And then Scrooge's nephew bursts through the door and starts telling him about a Christmas party. And this is where something really stood out to me in this movie, to which at this point had been fine and a little different and a little creepy, because mocap has only ever not looked creepy one time, and it was probably the greatest collection of filmmaking prowess pretty much ever. But the dialogue between them sounded really good. It sounded very Old Englishy and significantly better than anything I had heard in something like The Polar Express, which we had just watched. It seemed very familiar, in fact. And it almost is word for word exactly the dialogue from the book.
Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you. Humbug. Christmas humbug? Uncle, you don't mean that.
Merry Christmas. What reason have you to be merry?
It cuts down on some of the words to keep it snappy, but it's otherwise exact, and it keeps this for almost the entire movie. I was floored. I will say that I have not seen very many versions of A Christmas Carol, and I'm not sure if doing exactly the book is exactly a new idea or concept, but what I'm used to and have grown up on being pretty much the Disney and the Muppet one, this is a really sharp contrast. Throughout the movie, as it went on, I seeped up more and more of the script, loving the performances of the lines from Jim Carrey and Jim Carrey and Jim Carrey, oh, and a couple other people too, but Jim Carrey is such a talented actor. Him voicing so many people is like night and day from Polar Express with Tom Hanks. It's creepy, it takes its time in a lot of things because it stays so accurate, it covers so much more of the story and the heart of what makes me love the story than, oh, poor Tiny Tim and his tiny freaking crutch. I kind of fell in love with the script, or at least the overall idea of the script, and the score, and the performances, and the overall story structure. But something felt off. Like, I was loving what was there in theory, but it kind of felt hollow overall. And then we hit the scene that killed me forever.
Up on the housetop, reindeer paws.
The visuals on a whole in this movie, while a little bit better and all around cleaner than the previous two motion capture movies, it still just doesn't really work for me. Anytime there's a character on screen especially, the environments and towns look pretty good actually and very real feeling, and then you have these characters walking and talking through them, and they're all kind of nightmare fuel, but not in the way this movie wants. How do I know it's not the way this movie wants? Because the couple instances of horror this movie tries to do are probably the least scary parts of them. I first noticed this when Scrooge looks out or gets thrown out or something out the window, I don't really remember, and looks at all the spirits around in horror, and while the music and Jim Carrey and even the actions themselves are telling me this is an intense and scary or at least interesting moment, the characters and spirits just look so flat and weird, and they kind of look like they were edited on in post to this real looking world. I just felt so empty towards the moment. And again with that scene at the end of The Ghost of Christmas Present with the creepy little dudes and, him completely aging away while laughing, it's a horrifying moment, a moment that I would have and should have loved. I love horror used in stories like this so much. Literally having someone laugh while something visually horrifying is happening to them is amazing to me. If you have that in your movie, I'll probably love it. But the entire room feels like its emptiness and flatness and the weird uncanny valley faces are consuming the moment, and I just felt super underwhelmed. Again. But I was geared up for the third spirit. I was like, you know what? They tried some cool things with number 2, so the third spirit that scared me to death in the freaking Disney version growing up has to be really, really good, right? Right? This stupid freaking scene is the culmination of all the weird, flat, out there visuals and its characters, like Jim Carrey candle, and another problem I have with this movie that I haven't really talked about much yet, but I kind of alluded to in the beginning. Filmmaker and director Martin Scorsese once described MCU movies and comic book movies on a whole as something akin to theme parks, much to the chagrin of Marvel and comic book movie stands in general all over the world. And I mean, he kind of has a good point. And nothing is more apparent with that than the recent No Way Home marketing. I have not seen the film, so I can say nothing on its quality, but the marketing and the way they worked around the twists and leaks and controversies show that they are definitively making this huge, first-time, must-ride experience of wild emotions, big twists, and flashy lights, bent on hitting hard with that nostalgia and that super sweet moment of serotonin, with them all coming back, like a ride at a theme park. They're fun and attract big audiences, but they're much more focused on getting those first big thrills than they really are on making a good, lasting standalone movie. But man, the MCU isn't even close to feeling anything like whatever the heck Robert Zemeckis is doing in this movie.
Thank you for choosing Magic Carpet for all your travel needs. Don't stand until the rug has come to a complete stop.
I talked about it being there in Polar Express, that weird takes the camera away for no reason, huge spectacle scene that feels like you should have some 3D glasses on and be strapped into a moving chair at Universal. and they're fine in Polar Express, at best boring and pointless. But in this movie, it feels like they're here to actively kill what the script is doing, while Robert is flexing the fact that he can bounce around wherever and whenever he wants. A Christmas Carol, while feeling rather grand in scope overall, is kind of a personal horror story that takes place almost entirely in one town, with one grumpy man the entire time. The reason it works and how you connect with Scrooge and empathize with him is that all this stuff that's happening to him is so personal. You genuinely don't want this horror to happen to anyone. You're cheering for him to have a change of heart because you're forced to be dragged through this hell and see everyone it hurts with him. And yet, when it comes down to the heart of the movie, the turning point of Scrooge, they gave Jim Carrey some helium and had the weirdest chase scene of all time as it bounces weirdly through the moments of the book with the final untalking spirit. Moments that are supposed to hit super close to him, having him beg and squirm. And sure, some of that stuff is there. It takes its time pretty well with the Tiny Tim stuff, but it all comes right after Giant Rat eats cheese the size of Scrooge. The Cratchit stuff is fine, the grave scene is still fine, a little flashy in my personal opinion, but it still uses some cool visuals, but overall it just makes me feel so flat and kind of sad. Seeing a super faithful adaptation of one of my favorite Christmas stories finally having the guts to do a book-accurate adaptation. And while I would prefer 2D, even using 3D animation allows it to be more visually creative and creepy and do all of these amazing book concepts. But it just gets kicked over and over with these weird moments that pull me so completely out of it. It feels like a completely different movie. And just as the movie was ending and it was kind of leaving me with a good taste in his mouth because I was still connected enough to these characters and performances, that the change of heart stuff was still super sweet. They have Bob turn around, look right into the freaking camera, and start narrating an epilogue.
And Scrooge was better than his word. He did all that he said he would, and more.
You know, completely against the rest of the storytelling established at the beginning of the movie. Like, it makes no sense for them to do this here, except for it's just what Robert Zemeckis wanted. I think the moral of the story and the takeaway I have from this movie is that Robert, yet again, fell off on the wrong things in his freedom to make whatever he wanted. He took a story almost exactly from a beloved book, gathered an insanely talented voice cast, and sound designers and composers and even animators for this background and everything, and made a pretty okay film. I personally put my rating directly in the middle, 2.5 out of 5. Zemeckis has never been one of my favorite directors, but he's always had an amazing knack for bringing to life colorful, crazy, and over-the-top characters and ideas, pushing the limits like no one else. But when you take away those limits, you're never able to go back. I love Back to the Future. It's so charming and creative and influential, and almost every movie he put out around that time was insanely influential, each pushing the limits or bringing extraordinary things to life. In text, I love this movie. One of the greatest abridged audio tellings of A Christmas Carol if you added a little bit of narration in. But as a movie, especially as a chapter in history of the filmmaking career of Robert Zemeckis, it feels almost pointless, seeping into the background as all the good stuff, the talent, the creativity, the love gets drowned out by the inability to turn back the clock, no matter how hard you try. I don't know. I've watched a couple of the new Zemeckis movies that have come out now that he's doing live action again, and it just feels like he lost whatever made him so special, whatever made his movies so beautiful and fun, with hundreds of thousands of people loving them and connecting to them on such a personal level. It feels like something with mocap just sucked it all away, got everything he ever wanted, and lost everything he needed. I know this was kind of a sad video, not the kind I would typically make, but again, I was kind of running out of ideas, and this movie hit me really hard, and not really in the way it wanted to, with me really wanting to love it. But happy holidays, everyone, and Merry Christmas, maybe, if I keep my schedule up. I hope you guys are enjoying the season. I know this time can be cold and sad and rough for a lot of people, but don't forget you can always light a fire, and maybe me ranting about a stupid movie will bring some joy, even if Christmas lights and Hallmark movies and being overworked with not enough money and missing family and all the stuff that comes with the holiday season doesn't. But try and enjoy it this year. Remember, you can never turn back the clock, so try and make each Christmas something worth remembering. Happy holidays and Happy New Year's, everyone. I'm proud of you for making it through another crazy year. You guys have meant so much to me, and I've grown so much this year, and so has this channel. So genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And Merry Christmas.